Hello, it's Gabrielle Nicolay from the Complicated Kids podcast. And today I am joined by Christina Pompeo. Christina, welcome.
Hi, thank you. I'm so happy to be here.
I am so glad that you came because we are going to talk all about dyslexia today and the book that you have co written. But before we do that, tell the good people something about yourself.
I'm originally from New Jersey. I live in Simsbury, Connecticut, which is outside of Hartford. I am a school SLP and have been for my entire career. I presently work in Avon, Connecticut for their public school system. Right now, I work with, we have a fifth and sixth grade school, so I'm there. And I also work with fourth graders and some younger students at one of our elementaries. And I also
Okay,
teach
this is
graduate.
the part where I like bless your heart because not everybody can deal with middle schoolers.
Well, fifth and sixth, we're right. We do have a middle school, but fifth and sixth, but there's a huge difference between fifth and sixth. Like I noticed that they come in as these sweet, elementary school students, and now I'm starting to see it. Like spring fever is going to start soon, and it's like those sixth graders. You're like, okay, it's time for you to go to the middle school.
It's a tricky age. Sorry,
It
keep
is.
going. I cut
No,
you off.
it's very tricky. Well, I just started work. This year I have a first grader on my caseload at the elementary school, and it was one of the first times I've worked with a child that young, very long time. And after that first half-hour session, I was like, oh my God, I was like, that was exhausting. I was like, you didn't stop moving. Like it's just there's so much movement.
And for those
So
of us
just
who are
even
on the,
from
yeah,
yeah
for
from
those of us
first
who
to
work on the
fourth, like
toddler
there's a
side,
huge,
yeah.
huge difference. So
Yeah, and if
I
you work
do.
on the toddler side, you just think like that's totally normal.
I know.
And you
I
don't,
know.
and there's a lot fewer or less other things happening.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So, okay, so you work as a school SLP. You also have co-written this book. So tell us about this book. What is it called? What was it about? Like all the things.
But it is called, it's right here, The
Yeah.
Speech Pathologist's Guide to Dyslexia. I was looking, I was like, I already have it all like highlighted. I wrote my chapter and we did look through other chapters, but I am one of, let's see, I'm one of seven co-authors. And so it was really just kind of Courtney Overton and Jeanette Roberts were the organizers of this, and they had come up with this idea and looking at how SLPs have a really important role in terms of assessing and diagnosing and working with children with dyslexia or individuals and adults with dyslexia.
Mm.
And they decided that, we really need something geared towards SLPs.
Mhm.
And so we got, like, I had just received a message on Instagram from Courtney, and it was like, here's what we're doing. Here are the different proposed chapters. Anyone interested? And I have been working with Emerson College has a graduate program, Speech at Emerson, an online graduate program. And I had been facilitating courses with them. And one of the courses was language and literacy disabilities that has a very strong literacy emphasis. And so I was like, oh, I could write the language-based, literacy-based intervention chapter. And I signed up, and then like, I was like, what have I done? Oh my God, I've never done this before. What have I done? Like, and I was just reading through an old journal, and I was looking through, and there was an entry like, I agreed to write a chapter. What have I done? It was
Love
just,
it. And
yeah.
but
But
here you are. You've done it.
I've done it, and it was a great experience. It was a lot of work, but good work. And it's been great. I'm so proud of it. And I'm so proud to be a part of the amazing women that, co-authored this book. It's been wonderful.
It's so good. And it's such a good, the book, this particular book is for professionals, for speech language pathologists.
Yes.
Um, but, and because most of this audience is parents, there are some things that like all people
Yeah.
need to know about dyslexia.
Hmm.
So first of all, what is dyslexia?
Well, it is a language-based reading disability, and it primarily, I think it originally, like people spoke about, it primarily has its language deficits in phonology, so the sound system of the language, of our language. But further research has shown that, first of all, it often co-occurs with developmental language disabilities or disorders, and there are a lot of other language difficulties, whether it co-occurs with DLD and other language impairments or
DLD.
not.
What is that?
DLD is developmental language disorder.
Thank you. Yeah.
So whether it co-occurs with that or not, there are other deficit areas in addition to phonology. And so, that's where the research, and it's just really interesting as you start to look through the history of it, how a lot of the research and the especially in the legislation is very new. It's like in the 2000s that all of this has been happening, but and even just in the past decade or like 5-6 years or so. So typically these children or individuals have difficulty with decoding and encoding. So read it, sounding out words and then write a spelling. But then it carries over into comprehension, vocabulary, and because reading is difficult for them, then vocabulary development is not where it should be. They don't like to read, so they don't read very often because reading is hard. So all of the other kind of areas in language areas become impacted, and whether it's chicken or egg, I think is yet to be fully set. But I think that there are a lot of areas within the field that within dyslexia that SLPs have a really strong and important role to.
Yeah, and listen, because what I heard you say is, number one, there's a sound-based problem in dyslexia. Number two, there's a language-based problem in dyslexia. And the way that we come to reading is through spoken language.
Yep.
Right? Reading is a thing we made up, right?
Yes.
So that we could have more information.
Yep.
Talking is a thing that evolved. Maybe we made it up. Anyway, language is made up, but be that as it may, right? Humans are verbal creatures.
Yes.
Okay. So if we have a child who is experiencing language difficulties and or sound difficulties, that child is likely to be seeing a speech therapist at some point.
Absolutely.
Maybe not all of them, because some of them don't appear to have speech or language issues, and they end up in first grade.
Yes.
And what happens?
Or kindergarten, and they end up not, getting flagged on those phonological awareness screenings that are often part of kindergarten. And then you start to see where those gaps in the sounds, like the understanding, the cognitive part of that sound system. So it's different. It's the phonological part versus articulation. Although I have a colleague that always says that if the child has an articulation objective, they have a literacy objective or spelling objective that goes with it, because it is the way our brains are, wired with our sound system, and it is not what it should be, and it will impact, or can impact, and usually does impact, the phonological awareness, ends up affecting the the letter sound correspondence, and then going forward, then learning how to read. And then once we get to like 3rd and 4th grade, when we're reading to learn, that's where kind of the other parts of vocabulary and comprehension start to come into play as well.
We're going to come back to that in a second, but what you said is very interesting. And because the podcast is called Complicated Kids, let's break down. We think reading is like a normal thing that humans should be able to learn how to do. And for most people it is. And there's about, what are the percentages? In my head, it's like, I want to say there's like about 20% of kids are going to have some form of difficulty learning to read. Because, and let's break it down. I need to accurately perceive a sound, needs to accurately match a sound in my brain. Okay, so then it needs to map to my mouth, and I'm simplifying a lot here, to accurately produce a movement that is going to produce a movement that someone else's ears are going to hear accurately. Same process. Okay, now we're adding print, and we put fly specks. I once heard a professor say there's fly specks on a page, black and white marks on a page that we look at, ascribe sound meaning to,
Yep.
map with other sounds that are all inside, map to a vocabulary word.
And
This
our
is like,
knowledge of that.
and our
Yeah.
knowledge of that and what it
Insane.
means
Yeah.
and which word we're trying to map onto. And then, okay. And if we're reading aloud, now we're putting it into motor again.
Yes. And I've always been, every time I do a lot of pragmatic language groups in my school, and I talk about, when you think about what goes into anything we do in terms of language and communication, like even social communication, there's so much happening so quickly all at one time that I was like, you can't help but mess up. Like, it's just, and you're just like, how are more of us not, like
This
not
is
being
the
able to do
thing.
this?
Yes.
And
I
even
mean, the
with
fact that we're not all grunting at each other all the time and bumping
exactly.
into each other on the street. I mean, we drive cars.
It shows how amazing our brains are. And so and even when we're reading, there are two different systems. There's the visual representation, like the visual system where like we recognize words, those sight words that like we see them and we recognize them and we know them and we don't even have to think about it really. And then there's the like phonetic representation of those words where we're looking at the word and we're thinking about what those letters, what sounds those letters are making. And then you add in, especially in our language, in English, a C, the letter C can have so many different sounds depending on where it is in the word. And I remember working on some phonemic awareness and some, sounds and spelling with a student a couple years ago. And just that, the schwa sound, that sound, that could be spelled with pretty much any vowel depending on the word. And he's just like, he would just write words and just put an A and then be like, I'm not sure, put a U, I'm not sure, and then shrug. And then he'd look and he'd have like 5 words written down. And then he'd go, I don't know, is one of these correct? I go, well, yeah, you used all the vowels. So, you know, but yeah,
That's
it's really, it's crazy that we're really functioning as well as we do.
yeah, I totally agree with you. When we're talking about kids who are learning to read, one of the things you just mentioned were sight words
Hmm.
and then decoding. Will
Yes.
you just kind of, for the layperson, break those two things down and why? I have an agenda here. Why it's really more important to learn to decode than to have sight words.
So sight words are those words that when we see them, we know what they are, and like the, and and it can stretch out to like words like I think cat and dog. Once you see those a couple times, like I think those are considered sight words. But like everybody has a different repertoire of sight words, but those are the sight words, the words that they see and they know, they don't have to pause, they're reading right through. And then there are the words that they have to sound out, and depending on the student and their skill level, and we do it too. We come to, you even just asked me before we begin, how do you pronounce your name? And so you're going to like look at the letters and listen to the way I sound them. I write that, like I do that with my graduate students. I'm writing their names phonetically, putting stress marks where they go. But those sounding out is when we're looking at the letters in the words, and we might be chunking them into the digraphs and the blends, but we're deciding what what sounds those letters are making and putting them together and blending those sounds to make a word. And and that's a lot more difficult than just looking at a word and knowing what it means. And that's where the difficulty lies, with a lot of our students, whether it's dyslexia or any other language or reading impairments. That's a very difficult task for them.
And isn't it true too that like some students have a really high sight word vocabulary
Hmm.
because they're leveraging sort
Yeah.
of the long-term memory portion
Yep.
of their brain. And this gets into like some imaging stuff. And I don't know how, I'm not all that up on it either. Oh, I don't know how up you are on it. But in
Just from
terms,
what I read in Brittany Zucker's chapter
right,
on neurological underpinnings.
which is basically right in dyslexia, the wrong areas are working
Yes.
much of the time. And then
Yes.
teachers are inadvertently strengthening the wrong areas
Yes.
is the other
Hmm.
thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. I have that right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So, and it really is. And when you look at some of those structured literacy programs and methodologies that are really recommended for reading disabilities and dyslexia, though the skills that they are teaching and working on are activating the parts of the brain that should be activated, that show strong, that strong readers have activated versus weak readers who have other areas of their brains activated. So
When should kids be screened for dyslexia?
I
When should
think
they start treatment for it?
I think that I think as early as even kindergarten, even before, looking at those phonological awareness skills, which are, the child's ability to recognize, like, and in phonological awareness, I had a colleague that once said, can be done in the dark. So these are activities that you don't need to see anything.
Yeah.
You just need to listen and talk.
Yeah.
So it's, we're not working with letters and any symbols. So we're just working with sounds. So recognizing words that rhyme, being able to produce a rhyme, recognizing syllables in words, being able to clap out syllables, clap out words in a sentence. So those are all things that sometimes are done in preschool, but are really focused on in kindergarten. So around those ages, I think starting to look at how the strength or weaknesses in phonological awareness, and then we move into phonemic awareness. So phonological awareness is this big umbrella term, and like within that, like phonological awareness is the house, phonemic awareness is one room in that house. That those are the skills that are really tied to reading ability. So the ability to blend sounds together into a word. So if I say at, can they say cat? Or segmenting sounds. How many sounds do you hear? What are the sounds that you hear? And so those are the skills that are really tied to reading success in later grades. So I think as early as preschool and kindergarten, you can start looking at, there's lots of, like, you have all those rhyming books that even parents at home, just stop and see if they can fill in that word. And what's another word that sounds like, do these two words sound the same? I'm not sure. How about, what do you think? And I think you start to see very quickly that I always say students, and the children that can't do it, or that are having a lot of difficulty with that. And especially if a child has a phonological disorder, like, so in terms of their articulation and their speech development, if there are any especially significant speech difficulties as they're developing speech, that's like a huge red flag. And so that you'd want to start very early with that.
Just make sure everything's getting locked in.
And just getting addressed, because if they have all these phonological processes, like deleting final consonants, and especially some of the more atypical ones that aren't a normal part of our speech development, those are kind of those red flags that you want to pay attention to, because you're going to start to see that affect the way they can manipulate sounds and work with sounds, and then that affects sound letter correspondence and the alphabetic principle, and then reading and all that stuff. So it just becomes this cyclical difficulty.
You mentioned it before, and I want to stress it here again. When kids, and this is true of like across the board, but we'll just we'll just apply it to reading. When kids don't like something, particularly something new, that is a sure sign that something is wrong. Yeah. Maybe the material is too hard or not interesting. That could be. But when kids say reading is boring, I don't like it, they are not likely. Sometimes they might say reading is hard, but not mostly. I don't know if that's what you hear most of the time.
I think when they're trying to avoid something, there's a reason why they're avoiding it. I think most kids will just kind of go with the flow. Like, like they're in school. If we're supposed to read, I'm supposed to read. And you start to see, like, I've noticed too, like a lot of behaviors, like you start to see behaviors because, like, I don't want to look like I don't know something. I don't want to look different than everybody else. And this is really hard. And it makes me feel badly about myself. So I'm going to avoid this, whether I'm going to ask to go to the, like, something as mild as, oh, I have to go to the bathroom. My son used to go to the nurse for writing every day, and I'd get a phone call and I was like, is it writing period? Because send him back, like, that's fine. I'm working. Yeah. But I think that when you start to see those avoidance behaviors, and some of them can be like more significant behaviors, that they're like, let's disrupt the class, because if I disrupt the class, guess what I don't have to do? Read aloud. So,
Yeah.
um,
And it's
so I, yep.
totally worth discovering and not
And it's
dismissing.
worth paying attention to and kind of thinking about the why. And I think it's hard. I think classroom teachers have so much put on them right now that it's a lot.
Yeah.
Um, so it's hard to kind of take a step back and be like, I wonder why this behavior is happening. So that's where you have your school psychologists and your counselors and the SLP to come in and start looking at why it might be happening, and then how can we make it better.
Mhm. What is the role of the school speech language pathologist in the treatment of reading disorders?
It depends. It
Mhm.
depends. I tell my graduate students this all the time. It
Mhm.
really is setting specific. I think not setting specific, but it depends on the setting. It depends on the culture of your school. I don't do a ton of, I'm starting to do a lot more. But before I started teaching this language and literacy disabilities class for Emerson College, I didn't really like, we have a reading specialist, we have reading coaches, like, I had this, like, some phonological awareness tests that I would administer sometimes, but even at fifth and sixth grade, I wasn't really doing much of that. Um, but I think that I have a colleague that also teaches one of our classes, Kathy McKitchen, and she says to the graduate students all the time, and I carry it over to mine. Um, you may be the first to speak this language if you choose to work in a school and as an SLP. And so it really depends. There are a lot of SLPs that are very involved in the literacy development and interventions in their school, and some that are like, I don't do reading. That's not me. I don't do that. And I think that's another reason why we wanted to create this book, because this resource, because it's not always covered in graduate programs. I think it's covered a lot more now than it used to. I didn't have any literacy um, in
Wow.
1995 to 97 when I was in graduate school. That wasn't something that was even offered as a
Right.
course.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I think it really depends on the school. And
And
I've been starting to kind of like insert myself in and be like, hey, I kind of know some stuff about this. Can I like put my own spin on it, and can I be involved in some of these cases? And so
mhm. Well, and it's interesting. Okay, so the certainly the speech therapist, if they're so inclined, might be
mhm,
one person who is involved in the treatment of dyslexia and or the identification of a reading
yep.
disorder.
Mhm.
Um, the other people might be, I think I heard you say them, but reading specialist.
Reading specialists, a lot of times the reading specialists, and at least in my district, reading specialists and like reading coaches and are are usually involved in the RTI process, response to intervention. So
Mhm.
when these students start to get flagged because most schools and most districts have these universal assessments that they do every year, in the fall, in the winter, in the spring. And so once they do, and a lot of them are on programs computerized now. So like you get the printout and you get the where everybody's falling, and you have the cutoff. And when those students are kind of cuspy or they're below grade level expectations, they're flagged for intervention. So they start with different tiered interventions through the school system. So that's where I feel like the reading coaches and the reading interventionists come in.
Mhm.
Then when they're not responding to intervention and they've gone through all the tiers and they're referred for an evaluation, you start to look at special education teachers come in and do some of their evaluations. And in my district, special education teachers are the ones who do all of the reading interventions
Mm.
with the
Okay.
students.
Yeah.
Sometimes school psychologists will do, it's everybody. Like the cognitive testing gives you a lot of good information. The academic testing that the special ed teachers do, and then the language testing that the speech pathologists do. And you take it all together and then kind of decide who's doing what, divide and conquer.
Mhm.
I just wrote an IEP for a student who has dyslexia, and the special education teacher was working a lot on spelling and different spelling patterns, but also on morphology.
Mm.
So, different word parts like prefixes and suffixes and roots. So I'm going to work on something different. Like I'm going to work on figurative language and multiple meaning words and the comprehension piece of it. And, even looking, even just preparing to write that IEP, I was like, oh, I wish I had included this in my chapter, it's like, which I love about our field. I love that I'm constantly learning and there's constantly new information, but we just had a text string going. And I just said, I just found like 4 different things that I wish I had included in my chapter. And they were like, second edition will come
I
out.
was just gonna say, you'll put it in the second edition, it'll be fine. And that is true. Like things change rapidly.
Yes.
The rate of education, the number of things that we're discovering, particularly now, like in the neuroscience age, is like insane and fun and
Crazy.
and super interesting. And allows us to help more people. So
Yes,
that's also a good
wonderful.
thing. We could go all day, but I'm going to put the pin there. Thank
All
you
right.
so much.
Thank you.
If people want to find you or the book, how do they do that?
The book is, I think it's the SLP's Guide to Dyslexia is our Instagram handle, and I believe it's the same on Facebook. I'm at Christina Pompeo on Instagram, and I also have my private practice is Connect by Christina Pompeo. So Connect by CLP is my private practice, and yeah, and then all the different, if you go on the SLP dyslexia, the Guide to Dyslexia Instagram, you can find all the authors on there and check them out. They're wonderful. They're wonderful women who are doing amazing things. I'm so proud to be a part of them.
It's a really good group, and I really thank you for taking the time here today. And we'll link to all of that in the notes.
Awesome.
And we'll leave it there. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. It was wonderful to be here.
Take care.